Hello Greenstylers, Cynthia here. Today let's sew up some Eddy Pants together. The Eddy Pants come in 3 different inseam options. You can choose between petite, standard, and tall. Make sure to download the file that corresponds to your preferred inseam length. When choosing fabric for your Eddy Pants, we suggest lightweight knits with flow such as brushed poly, mesh, breeze, or circular knit. You'll want at least 25% stretch for the pants and 50% stretch for the undershorts and waistband. Cut 2 front main pieces mirror images. These pieces are labeled P1. Cut 2 of piece P2 labeled back main. Be sure to cut these as mirror images as well, and make note of the circle markings. I've marked them here with 2 clips just to remind myself where they are. The outer waistband is labeled C1 and you'll cut 2 of these as mirror images. You can mark the placement of the circle markings on the front part of the waistband for reference later. The inner waistband is labeled piece C2. Cut 2 of these as mirror images and consider using a sturdier athletic knit for additional support. I'm using polyester spandex from Greenstyle for the inner waistband as well as the optional shorts. For the optional shorts, you'll need piece H1. Cut 2 shorts fronts as mirror images and make sure to mark the notches on the side as well as the circle markings up on the top. Cut 2 of piece H2 as mirror images. This is the shorts back. Make sure to mark the notches on the side, and you'll also need to decide at this point if you'll be using a gusset. Follow the dotted gusset line right here if you will be using the gusset, or follow the straight solid line if you'll not be using a gusset. Cut 2 of piece H3, the side panel. This is the piece that has the slanted cut line on top. Make sure to mark the notches on both sides. Cut as mirror images. You'll also need piece H4, the side panel pocket. This is the piece with the straight edge on top. Be sure to mark the notches on both sides and you'll cut 2 as mirror images as well. If you're making the gusset, you'll need to cut 2 gusset pieces as mirror images as well. I've already stuck my 2 pieces together using wash away adhesive tape. Your piece will look like this. We'll begin our optional shorts construction with the gusset. If you are not making the shorts, you can skip ahead to the waistband. First, make sure that you have cut along the gusset cut line if you're using the gusset piece. Then with wrong sides together, baste the 2 gusset pieces together, or you can simply tape them together using some wash away adhesive tape like I've done here. Then we'll place the gusset on one of the back pieces with right sides together right along that same spot where we cut the gusset cut line. Note that the point of the gusset will be hanging off the edge of that back piece. If you're visual and also like precision, I've drawn in the 3/8 inch seam allowance, and we'll show you that the point lines up so that the seam allowance line meets up with the back piece, just like that. So your 3/8 of an inch stitch line will end right where the gusset meets the back piece. Pin or clip the gusset in place, and we will stitch it on using a stretch stitch or a serger in a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Serge onto the back piece an inch or so above the gusset so that you're precisely at 3/8 of an inch by the time you get to the gusset. Carefully stitch, making sure that the gusset stays perfectly in place and that the raw edges align. That will result in a smooth bottom edge transition from the back piece to the gusset. At this point, you can push the seam away from the gusset and toward the pant and top stitch right on top of the back piece. Just make sure that you top stitch only to the top of the gusset. Stop precisely where the gusset ends. Lay both pieces on the table with right sides facing up. We are going to pin and stitch them right along that center back seam, and notice that the gusset is now part of that center back seam. So flip one piece on top of the other. Make sure that gusset stays opened up and pin all along that center seam. Note that the raw edge of the pants piece with the gusset is pointing in the same direction as the raw edge of the other pants piece, as well as the raw edge of the gusset. But once you get to the point where the piece is attached to the gusset, you'll notice that the seam is pointing away from the raw edge. So your seam sort of twists right there where the gusset begins. You have one bit pointing toward the right, and then where it's attached to the gusset, the seam is pointing toward the left. So I find it easier to oftentimes add a couple of extra pins right next to each other to keep those pieces pointed the way I want them to point. But in this case, my fabric is pretty sturdy and thick, and it wants to be twisting backwards. So a little trick that you can do is you can actually snip into that fabric right there where the gusset begins, so that you can have the raw edge pointing in the direction that you want it and not twisting and pulling back that way. The important thing is to make sure that you don't snip too far in. So I like to just see where my needle threads are and make sure that I don't snip past the left needle thread. There. Now I can make sure that that raw edge stays pointed in the correct direction all the way up until the gusset. I hope that explanation wasn't too lengthy, but I know those are the type of super intricate details that I always like to know when I'm doing a new technique. We'll stitch this seam using a stretch stitch or serger and a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Make sure to maintain that 3/8 inch seam allowance all the way through, especially when you get to that intersection with the gusset. Confirm success by checking to make sure there's no holes in the top point of that gusset. At this point, you can top stitch all the way up. The two seams around the gusset should be pointing away from the gusset. We'll begin pocket construction by hemming the side panel pocket, piece H4. Fold the top edge down 1 inch toward the wrong side, and then top stitch using a zigzag stitch, twin needle, or your cover stitch. Bring over the side panel piece H3, and we're going to lay that pocket piece that we hemmed right on top of it, matching up the notches. Both pieces will have right side facing up. Pin or clip in place, and then we're going to baste these two pieces together along the two sides and the bottom edge. We'll do this with both pocket and side panel pieces. Use a basting stitch on your sewing machine, which is the longest stitch length on the straight stitch option, and stitch close to the edge or at least within the seam allowance so that you won't have to worry about pulling those basting stitches later on. Repeat with the other side panel and side panel pocket piece. If you haven't already, stitch the two back pieces together at that center crotch seam, lay them right sides up on the table, and lay the pocket panels next to them, aligning those double notches. With right sides together, we're going to flip the pocket piece onto the back piece, lining up the double notch and the bottom and top edges, and pin both sides in place. Stitch with a stretch stitch or serger and a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Open up our new piece, lay it with right sides up on the table, and bring over the front pieces, also with right sides up. Line up those single notches and flip the front pieces onto the pocket panel, lining up the notches as well as the top and bottom edges. Pin in place. Stitch with a stretch stitch or serger and a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Open everything up with right sides up again, and we will fold the whole piece in half, aligning the front center crotch seams. Pin in place, and once again stitch with a stretch stitch or serger and a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Now we'll line up and with right sides together, pin the inner thigh or inseam. If you constructed with no gusset, you'll line up the raw edges with the front center and the back center seams aligned. But if you use the gusset, you'll simply line up the front center seam with the center of that back gusset. Pin or clip from one hem all the way through to the other. Once again, stitch with a stretch stitch or serger and a 3/8 inch seam allowance. To hem the undershorts, we'll simply turn the bottom edge up 1 inch toward the wrong side, pin in place, and then top stitch with a zigzag, twin needle, or cover stitch. As you can tell, I take a more casual approach to hemming the undershorts than I do, say, leggings, for example. Normally I'll mark 2 inches and fold up to that line to get the 1 inch. I'll also use my cover stitch sometimes, but today I just was feeling very casual about it. And that is perfectly fine. Sometimes we just want an easy sew to make us feel good. And I think undershorts is the perfect time to do that. As you may have noticed from the cutting the pieces section, I'll be doing the standard 4-piece waistband here. But if you're looking for the fold-over waistband video, don't despair. I've added a link in the video description to the courtside shorts where you can find that fold-over waistband constructed. Moving on to the waistband, here you see I have the inner waistband and also the outer waistband pieces present. We'll place them with right sides together, pin and stitch those side seams of both inner and outer waistband using a stretch stitch or serger and a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Now that they are stitched up at the side seams, we'll take one of our waistbands and turn it with right sides out. It doesn't matter which one at this point. Whichever one you've turned with right sides out, you'll place it inside of the other waistband. So now the two waistbands are going to be right sides together. Line up the side seams and line up the top edge of the waistbands. Pin them in place all along the top edge. Now that the top edges are aligned, I'd like to show you the difference between the inner and the outer waistband. Here's a really nice view with these two differing fabrics. You can see that the inner waistband is clearly shorter than the outer waistband. The purpose is so that once we align those bottom edges and attach it to the pants, the inner waistband will be pulled down toward the inside of the pants and not show from the outside. Stitch the top of the waistband with a stretch stitch or serger and a 3/8 inch seam allowance. And as always, you can add elastic to that seam if you need it for extra support or stability. Turn the waistband right sides out, line up the bottom edges, and pin all the way around. Here's a tip for getting a flatter side seam. Turn one of the seams to the left, the other seam to the right, and nest them next to each other when you pin and baste them in place. Baste using a straight stitch and the longest stitch length on your sewing machine. Mine is 5.0. To begin pants construction, we'll bring over all of our pants pieces to the table. I have my fronts and my backs here. Lay the two back pieces together with right sides facing and align them at that center seam. We'll pin in place. Of course, only if Malcolm allows it. Once we've got the back pieces pinned in place, we'll do the same with the front pieces. Right sides together, aligning at that center crotch seam and pin along that center seam. We'll take both of these pieces to the sewing machine or serger and stitch with a stretch stitch or serger and a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Set the front piece aside and you can open up the back piece to find the top edge. Here are the two legs and here is the center back seam. We are going to be working with this top seam right here. My two circle marks are marked with clips. We are going to make two basting stitches all along that top edge from one clip to the other. Set your sewing machine to the longest stitch length and begin stitching about 1/8 of an inch away from that top edge. Stitch all the way across the top of that back piece. Leave your thread tails long, and here's how mine looks. Stitch a second row of basting stitches about 1/8 of an inch away from the first row. Now find the bobbin threads and begin pulling on them to gather the fabric. You want to gather it moderately. It doesn't have to be super tight. We'll be adjusting the amount of gathering in a next step. I like gathering all the way to the center seam and then work from the other side to gather from that direction all the way toward the center seam. And once you have that gathered, set this aside and we'll move over to the table. Set your shorts on the table with right side of the front facing up. We'll bring over the pants and lay the front piece of the pants with right sides facing up as well. So the wrong side of the pants will be touching the right side of the shorts. Pin along the top edge. You'll just pin the top edges flat with 1:1 ratio and just double check after you've pinned to make sure that the top edges of the pants reach to approximately the same spot on the shorts on either side. Baste that top edge in place. Lay the back pants on the table with the wrong side facing up. Here's the top part that you've already gathered. Lay the shorts on top with the right side of the back shorts touching the wrong side of the pants. Here you can see the circle marks on the front of my shorts. I've highlighted them with some clips. Align the center back seam of the shorts with the center back seam of the pants. And now we're going to take that top edge of the pants and we're going to wrap it around toward the front of the shorts. The circle marking on the edge of the pants needs to align with the circle marking on the shorts. So at this point you want to adjust the gathering, make sure it's even all the way around and that it is the correct length to meet that circle mark. Pin both sides in place, adjusting the gathers as needed. Now baste all along this edge. Now turn your pants inside out so that the right side of the pants, front and back, are touching each other. We need to stitch up the inner leg seam of the pants. So align the front and back center crotch and then pin all the way up and down the legs. Stitch using a stretch stitch or serger and a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Now the Eddy pants are not hemmed, so you have a few choices of how to manage the end of that serger tail. You can either snip it off and just let it be, or you can fold it back up along the seam and stitch it to the seam using a tight zigzag stitch. Or you can take a needle and thread that thread tail back through the seam. Another option would be to snip it off and use some fray check to prevent fraying. To attach the waistband to the pants, we'll want to quarter the top of the pants and the bottom of the waistband. Mark the quarter marks with pins or clips. Then turn the waistband wrong side out and slip it over the pants. Align your quarter marks and pin in place. Stitch all along that top edge using a stretch stitch or serger and a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Fold the waistband back up and check for any basting stitches that may be showing. Pull those out and you, my friend, are done with your very own Eddy Pants. Congratulate yourself with a hearty back pat, and be sure to share your Eddy Pants with us too. We'd love to see your makes on social media using hashtag #GSEddyPants. Happy sewing from all of us at Greenstyle.